Well, welcome back. Back in April, I gave a talk at St. Anne Belfield School to a group of K through 12 parents about sleep and how it impacts kids and teens. After the presentation, a 12th grader named Lizzie shared about her capstone research project where she explored the question, what is the correlation between childhood anxiety and disordered sleep, and how might we alleviate the challenges posed by this correlation in children aged 13 to 18? Her takeaways were so thoughtful, and I loved hearing how passionate she had become about the topic. So I asked Lizzie to come on the podcast to talk a bit more about her project, and I was thrilled when she agreed. So whether you're parenting a teen now or just looking ahead, Lizzie's research offers valuable insight into what our kids are facing and what we can do to support them. Hi, I'm Allison Egidi, a pediatric sleep and wellness coach and a mom of two. I love to help parents find solutions. This is How Long Till Bedtime. Well, hi, Lizzie. I'm really excited to chat with you about your capstone project today. Before we dive in, could you tell listeners a bit about who you are, your grade, your interest, what you're planning to do after high school, or anything else that you'd like to share?
Hi, thank you so much for this opportunity. I really appreciate it. My name is Lizzie Pisani. I am a 12th grader at St. Anne's Belfield School, as you mentioned. I'm kind of I enjoy hanging out with friends, got pretty regular things. And I'm going next year to the University of Florida.
Awesome. And how did you first get interested in sleep and mental health as a topic for your capstone project? Was there a personal experience, a class, or something else that sparked that idea?
Yeah, so during COVID, I was a 7th grader. And I had, like many other people, become essentially nocturnal. I would be up until 4 or 5 in the morning, just kind of talking with friends because I didn't have much structure. There was no real in-person school. And then my life consisted of, being awake during classes and then sleeping through every break I had. As soon as school ended, I would sleep until like the late hours of the night and then be up all night. And I noticed, one, just the fact that it affected the fact that like I couldn't really be with my family because I was sleeping when everyone else was awake. Also, my mental health, just kind of, I wasn't like sleeping in a good way. All of it was kind of like I wasn't getting a solid chunk of 8 hours or 7 hours. It was like 2 hour chunks of sleep, kind of just whatever I could fit it throughout the day. So kind of that experience was rough for my mental health as well as just kind of my life. And then once I figured out how to get that back to a normal sleep schedule, I noticed a lot of positive changes and kind of thought that I was interested to see like the correlation between those two things and if like mental health and sleep are as correlated as it was in my experience.
So I'm so interested to take a second to go back to that middle school experience because I have a middle schooler and I told her this morning that I was going to chat with you, and she said, did she know that it was affecting her mental health? Because as you can imagine, I am a stickler with my children about sleep. And so I'm curious, as you went through that and then got to the other side of getting more sleep and feeling better, did you register, I feel better now that I've gotten more sleep, or did your parents point it out? I'm just curious because a lot of parents are listening and thinking, are my kids going to come to this on their own, or do I need to guide them? So do you have insight on what helped you register that you felt better with more sleep?
For sure. For me, definitely my parents were not approving of my sleep schedule. They kind of, and I think they saw it in me as like, when they did see me, I was kind of drowsy and tired and irritable, kind of a lot of the things that come with insufficient sleep and stuff like that. I also noticed it, maybe not at the time in myself, but definitely when I kind of improved my sleep, I noticed how much better I felt, how much more energized, obviously, but also just like mental health, how much happier I felt, how much more like stable I felt. And I kind of like came to that on my own just because it didn't really occur until the next school year. Because once we were off online school, I was kind of forced back into the environment of being awake from the hours of 8 a.m. to 3 or whatever it is. And that wasn't possible for me before that. So I kind of had to force myself back into like a normal sleep schedule. And I think
Hmm.
that my whole family noticed when I was back to kind of a stable place, sleep schedule wise, and also mental health wise.
Awesome. So, for those who aren't familiar, can you explain what a capstone project is at your school, what it looks like, what is the goal or the structure, and how much time have you spent working on this project?
Yeah, so a capstone, it's an optional year-long research project that is an opportunity for seniors to dive into virtually any topic of their choice. There is very few limitations. We have ranges from like sciencey things, history things, pop culture things, like a bunch of different topics. And it's definitely it's super interesting. I chose mine just kind of based on something I hadn't known much about, and kind of with my experience before, I wanted to see learning about the correlation. Also, even now, I sometimes struggle with my sleep. I struggle with being up in the middle of the night and staying awake in the middle of the night, and then all of that stuff. So I was also kind of just for myself, selfishly trying to find how do I help myself in this. I'm off to college next year. I know sleep and college aren't the best for each other. So I was kind of wondering like how I can have the like the tool set, like the set of tools for my kind of experiences next year. And the amount of work, it's a lot. It's really flexible, so it's not a class. It's essentially it's all on your own. You make your own grading rubric, you make your own time. You could do it all in a weekend and spend all those hours, or you can spread it apart. I personally do it. We have like an off and on schedule with certain classes. So like if I'm not in calculus, I'll spend more time doing my capstone because, I have less things to focus on. But it's definitely super time consuming, especially at this point. The project is done. We present them, I believe, April 23rd. So we're kind of in that final
Soon.
stretch. So it's definitely right now, it's like a lot, but yeah.
And so it started with the idea of looking into the connection with mental health and sleep,
Yes.
and then you honed in on your
Yes.
final question.
Yes. So my project definitely, it really shifted and changed a lot. So at the beginning, I was just focusing on kind of sleep and mental health. And then I noticed a lot of the times, because I began my research with like kind of just like, why is sleep so important? Why should we care, essentially? Because I knew that was kind of how to pull people in with my presentation was like, why should you listen to this? Why should you care? And I noticed with a lot of the things when it would mention anxiety, it would also mention screens and technology and the effect of that on sleep, and also the effect of that on anxiety with social media and all that stuff. I noticed a connection between all of those things, and I decided to end up kind of adding that aspect into it as well. So my project is, I would say, a pretty equal balance, maybe a little bit more on the anxiety side just because that's my kind of personal experience, but also a lot about screens just because of my like notice in my research. Also through I did some interviews with some really cool people who all mentioned screens as a big issue.
Interesting. And it sounds like the screens could have been part of your journey in the sense that you
Yes.
were
Oh, yes.
awake, engaging with friends, using a screen in
Absolutely.
some format that
Yeah.
could have affected your sleep and or mental
Oh,
health.
absolutely. Yeah.
And so, what did your research look like? Was it, I know you'd mentioned me before, I think you met with a faculty member
Yes.
at UVA. Were you reading? Tell me a little bit more about the research aspect of your project.
Yeah. So for my project, if there's a history project, it's more so like reading books and stuff like that. Mine was more just finding a bunch of like scholarly sources that all, and I kind of, my goal was to find a trend throughout them. So if I saw a fact in one source, I would make sure that it was correct and kind of double and triple check that in different sources. So I began, like I said, with like a preliminary research, just gaining my overall understanding of sleep, why is it important, anxiety, who it affects, how widespread it is, all of that stuff. And then I started reaching out to professionals and kind of got some interviews, which was super helpful. And like started kind of going into the more specifics of the anxiety effect and the screens and stuff like that. And like I said, my question and my project itself really shifted throughout my process of research and talking to people and all that fun stuff.
And so, what were some of the most surprising or interesting things you discovered about how sleep and screens, we'll add that in there, how sleep and screens affect anxiety in teenagers?
So something that I thought was really interesting is I sent out a survey to my entire upper school, so 9th through 12th graders, and I was really lucky. I got a lot of responses to it, and I didn't realize how much it affected my community itself. You know, it's one thing
Mm.
to do the research and see the statistics and think, wow, that's like a lot of people that this is affecting. But, you know, in my survey results, there's a huge amount of people. The majority of people experience some level of anxiety, the vast majority of them. The majority of people aren't sleeping that 8 to 10 hour mark. They're sleeping, you know, 4 to 6 or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's like, and I thought that was super interesting, kind of just seeing that and seeing how it actually is like a real issue that not only is like a statistic, but actually affects like the people I know and the people I care about. So that was super interesting and kind of eye opening to me.
And did you see a correlation between that group that said they were sleeping less, having more anxiety?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. That was like a very
Interesting.
clear correlation. I think it has a lot to do with, you know, people sleeping less. Obviously, the effect that just like lack of sleep has on anxiety. But I also think there's that effect of like the people who are sleeping less. You know, my school has we have a lot of D1 committed athletes. It's a very high academic school. We have a lot of people who kind of, so I think that just the lack of sleep due to like practices or stuff like that, I think also kind of has that effect on everything.
Right. Like the environment is potentially already a somewhat stressful
Yes.
environment as far as high expectations, which that in itself can cause anxiety.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
then you tack on not enough sleep. It's like fuel on that
Absolutely.
fire.
Yeah, it is definitely the group of people. It's like a very, I was very lucky. Part of my project is kind of finding a filled gap in research that my project fills, which is difficult. It's something that's kind of missing in research. And besides the fact that it's a relatively new issue with just like there's rising rates of anxiety, but also like social media and screens have not been around for a very long time, so
Yes.
it's relatively new. But also just like my school's environment, like so many just like incredible athletes who like that's high pressure, and people who are kind of trying to get committed for athletics and having to put all of their like work into looking their best athletically and also academically. Super, essentially like a college prep school, so a lot of kids are kind of really focused in, and that was something that I was happy to be able to kind of see that filled gap is like this is a very like this is a very specific group of people, and I got
Hmm.
to see kind of this affects them. I noticed at a higher rate than just like the statistics that I found compared to my survey results.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, and you may not have this number off the top of your head, but what percentage roughly do you think of the kids were not getting the optimal amount of sleep
Oh my goodness.
in
It
your peer
was
group?
it was more than half, way more than half. It was probably like
Way more than
around
half.
70%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As you're talking, I'm thinking a whole nother research topic could be the effect of sleep and athletic performance and injury.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
Because it's really can affect your likelihood of getting injured when
Yeah,
you don't get optimal sleep.
absolutely, absolutely.
So interesting. So, um, did your research reveal anything specific related to sleep habits that seemed to help teens feel less anxious or more emotionally regulated or ready to navigate all the other stressors that they're dealing with?
Absolutely. So I would say just kind of treating when it's the sleep that is causing the anxiety or the struggles to regulate emotions or all of those issues that come with lack of sleep, kind of trying to treat that cause is a lot easier than dealing with like the anxiety itself because you're not getting to like the root of the issue. So I found a bunch of tips, but the things that I thought were the most kind of helpful to share just in my capstone and also here is things that teens themselves can do or parents could tell their teens to do that can they don't it doesn't require a doctor, it doesn't require, you know, any medical intervention, just things that they
Mm-hmm.
can do, simple things that, you know, might not affect their life too much, but will have a big positive effect on their thing. So a few of those were having a sleep routine. So it's hard for high schoolers and really a lot of kids, you know, on the school days, we're forced to wake up at 6, 7 a.m.
Yeah.
So by the time we get to Thursday or Friday, maybe we're naturally falling asleep at more like 9:30, 9 rather than later. But then when the weekend comes and we're able to sleep in and we want to hang out with our friends on the weeknight or the weekends, we're up late, we're sleeping in, and then we're kind of back to square one every Monday because we
Hmm.
stayed up late Sunday night because that's the sleep schedule. We had woken up early that or late that morning, and now we're kind of staying up late Sunday, getting up early Monday, and then you're kind of in this game of like catch up. So I think trying to set a routine that like even in weekends, like trying to get up at the same time and go to bed early, which is difficult and it's not always
Hmm.
super achievable for, you could have a concert you want to attend that doesn't end until 10 p.m.
Right.
But just on nights that you can and on weekends that you can, just try to kind of keep a routine where you're trying to go to bed by 9:30 every night. So you're not kind of back at square one on Mondays. Um, Also, I read a lot about working out and how it should be like they're good to kind of tire you out, but not super close to bedtime just because of that like
Hmm.
adrenaline and all of that stuff. So kind of working out in like the afternoon, maybe like one or two or right after school, but not at like 6 or 7, before bedtime. I read a lot about naps, which was my thing during COVID. I was napping a lot. And even, when the school year gets stressful, naps are like very helpful, but it talks a lot about not necessarily getting rid of them. They're not perfect, but if you have to, you have to, but try to avoid really lengthy naps. So I've found myself napping for 3, 4 hours, and that's a sleep. That's
Oh
not a
yeah.
nap. And
Yeah.
that's so trying to get like 1 hour max, and then also don't nap past 3 p.m. So kind of keeping that rhythm of not like, because if you take a nap right before bedtime, you're going to be up late. I also read about medication, which is a lot of medications will kind of have something in it that affects sleep. So just kind of looking into that and seeing, okay, if I'm started taking this medication and now I'm staying up super late, maybe talk to your doctor if you're struggling to sleep, stuff like that. And then
And I'm curious what medications, I'm sure parents listening are going to be like, what medications is she talking about?
yeah. So I would say, like, from what I understand, I know that it could be some like anxiety medications as well as
Hmm.
like ADHD medications. I think both of
Yep.
those can kind of have that effect. And I'm sure there's more, but I think
Those are the big
yeah,
ones.
I'm sure those
Yeah.
are the two main ones that kids and parents like are dealing with. And then the final thing was keeping everything besides sleeping outside of the bedroom. So, homework, screen time, if you're just like hanging out, try to keep the only thing you should be doing in your bedroom is sleeping, which is difficult. And I am definitely perhaps a little hypocritical. It's not my strongest, my
Uh-huh.
strongest thing, but I think that's something that's like super helpful, kind of the separation of your activities and your sleeping. So, yeah, those were the
Yeah.
main things that I thought would be kind of that would help with the sleep aspect.
And I always say knowledge is power.
Right.
And it sounds to me that you've gained a tremendous amount of knowledge on sleep. So there's the aspect of having the knowledge, and then there's that part of implementing it. And I joke with my kids, and I say this to parents I work with, that sometimes I wish my mom was here to parent me because I know how to help myself sleep. I spent a lot of time since becoming a sleep coach figuring out my routine and what sets me up for sleep. It does not mean I always do it. And
Yeah.
I am an adult with a fully formed brain. And so I'm curious if you'd be open to sharing. You have this knowledge, you even have some personal experience of knowing that sleep helps you with your personal mental health. How easy or hard does it feel to actually implement what deep down you're like, I know what I should be doing,
Yeah.
but then making that leap to do it?
For me, like, it depends on the tip, which I think is sort like it's like not all of these things. Obviously, if you were to implement all of them, that's amazing and your sleep would improve drastically. But even if implementing like one or two would just improve it
Mm-hmm.
and kind of so that's like for me, I struggle with keeping everything out of the bedroom. That's kind of where I will like hang out with my friends if my friends come over or just like after school relax and lay in bed. But certain things like I don't like staying up late. I
Mm-hmm.
naturally am
Good.
kind of in bed and ready to sleep by like 9, 9:15. So things like that I keep like I am able to follow. Like avoiding lengthy naps, I'm able to follow, but there are things that are obviously kind of more difficult. So I would say they're definitely not all easy, and it depends on the person. If there's somebody who's, an athlete and they have practice and it doesn't end until
I
9, and then they
know.
wanna get dinner with their friends on a Friday night and stuff like that, maybe that's not the best one, but, maybe just pushing your workouts back a few hours so you're like, things like that, implementing the ones that feel like the most able to be done in your life because
Hmm.
sometimes they just don't it's not possible, but doing the best you can for it is kind of my like big recommendation.
Yeah, I think it's about, even my kids are in sports and they're, 10 and 12. And there are nights where, my daughter's not home till 9:30, and really my 10-year-old loves to go to bed at 7:30.
Yeah.
And it's like, and we're doing basketball up, we're putting on jammies in the car. I'm like, come on, let's go. And so I think your point is a good one in that it's not that we're going to be perfect all the time,
Yeah,
but when you can do it the vast majority of the time or as much as you can, there are still benefits
absolutely. Yeah.
to mental health. And I'm curious, have you changed to keeping screens out of your room?
Yeah, I have been working a lot on like my phone is my alarm, but I keep it on the nightstand that's further away from me.
Uh-huh.
And also I've been really, really working on that 30-minute period, hour period before bed, doing
Oh,
something that's not
great.
screen related, which I've noticed for probably the first time in my since doing this project, probably for the first time in my life, I've been sleeping through the night. I think one of those things
Yay.
is I haven't been eating or drinking like between the periods right before bed,
Yes.
which I've noticed has had a huge impact of not waking up in the middle of the night. Huge, huge impact. So I've been sleeping through the night for the first time since I could remember. And I've noticed that sleeping through the night, like that sleep is such higher quality and I feel so much better the day after. So things like that, that's something I've actually noticed, which I think is cool to have done this project and notice how it actually improved my life.
Yes, I love to hear that on both the screens, not 30 minutes before, and then also the eating, which I don't think it's talked about enough,
Yeah.
even for young kids. And I just had a consultation before we hopped on here where I said, we really don't want to be offering milk or snacks before bedtime because the way your blood sugar spikes and it can
Yeah.
be very disruptive to sleep. And even for me, I really try not to eat after I try to be done eating by 7:30 if I can,
Yes.
and then not eating. And my sleep is so much better. And I wear a sleep tracker so I can literally see
Yeah.
it. And so that's great that you've noticed improvement. It's an example of just a little change
For
that,
sure, yeah, and it's had a really, really big effect, and it's hasn't really been much of, like, a hardship for me. I eat dinner pretty early, and then it's just kind of no unnecessary snacking or drinking water or liquids before, right before bed, so I've noticed that has had a big effect.
have you, I know you haven't presented your project yet. Have you talked to any of your peers about this? And do you think you've been able to positively impact anybody else's sleep?
Yeah, I noticed, like, a lot of people I haven't been able to kind of share things yet, but I have noticed a lot of people that are, like when I say my topic, people will ask, like, "Oh, you're doing a capstone, what's it on?" And I'll kind of explain it, and they'll be like, "Oh my gosh, I have to sign up for that. I struggle with my sleep so much. I struggle with anxiety. I'm always on my phone, and I notice that I'm sleeping so bad," or all of that stuff, so I'm really excited to hopefully kind of help out my classmates in whatever issues they're dealing with sleep-wise.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'd love to know what you think parents should understand about teen sleep.
Yeah, so I think just like having these tips that I shared is something that's so helpful because teens don't necessarily always care about their health. And that's coming from a teen myself. We're not always worried about, if our sleep quality is okay. That's kind of the parents' job. And I think that kind of like helping your kids implement this. And like maybe, for example, if you're cooking dinner at 8 p.m., maybe push that back a little bit. Stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. Just like little things that could help and just also keeping your kid informed because like I didn't know any of these things before I had done this research. So I think like if I had known these things, I would have implemented them a long time ago and it probably would have had a positive effect on my life a long time ago. And I'm lucky to share it with my classmates, but I can't share it with the whole world. And even the ones that I share it with, maybe some of them are just going to be like falling asleep in the corner because it's hard to motivate teens to care about things that don't seem super important to them and aren't super interesting. But like, I think just kind of having these things and helping teacher like teens, all of this stuff, I think is super important and super helpful.
I think it's about planting the seed.
Yes.
So I agree with you that you could present this to all your classmates, and my guess is the vast majority are going to be like, okay, here she is doing her research
Yeah.
project.
100%.
But the seed is there. And there may be a moment when they're in college, maybe some of them still in high school or when they're in college, or maybe even adulthood, when they are in a bad place and they might think, Gosh, Lizzie did that project and she mentioned XYZ, and
Yeah.
they might at a minimum get curious to think about or investigate how their sleep habits are affecting their mental health. So even if you don't feel like people take action now, I think you presenting this to your peers is really powerful, and that you could be planting the seed that could help them down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. I also kind of was thinking like because I want to give them out like a pamphlet, I took a lot of the most like I thought helpful information, the helpful tips for them. And I want to give that out. Just because, sometimes if a teen isn't struggling at the very moment, maybe their sleep is wonderful right now, but maybe they'll go off to college and be, away from their mom for the first time who always watched over their sleep and now they're staying
Yes.
up until the late hours of the night, and kind of having that knowledge and having like it kind of in their pocket to say, okay, back then I didn't struggle, but now I am, and now I could implement this. I think
I
that would
love
be
that.
super helpful.
So they're going to have a takeaway.
Yes, they'll have a takeaway.
That's awesome. So, when we last connected, you had an idea for schools as it relates to sleep and mental health. Can you share your idea about how you think schools could help empower teens in this area?
Yeah, so my kind of idea like stemmed from the idea of like we can't expect teens to know things they aren't taught, and they can't they don't we're not born with the knowledge of the importance of sleep and how to aid it and how to make it better. So I think kind of implementing in schools is the best way to help because every single teen has to go to school, and I think kind of having that is like the best way to get it super widespread. So one thing that doesn't really have to do with curriculum, I just read about pushing start times back a little bit.
Yes.
I'm very lucky. My school doesn't start until 8:45. My old high school that I went to when I lived in Florida started at 7:30, and that wasn't even the earliest that I've known of, and that's crazy early because the amount of, homework that we're assigned, sometimes we can't go to bed until, 10:30, and being kind of forced to wake up super early, it'd be helpful if it was a little bit later. Also, just my idea has been to kind of implement a sleep curriculum. Doesn't have to be a super long, doesn't have to be a full year class, kind of just like a unit, maybe like a few days, just to kind of
Mm-hmm.
teach students what I've taught today, as well as like, how to help their sleep, how to see if they're struggling with their sleep, and also just like teach them about the tips and stuff like that. Also,
Mm-hmm.
for older students, I read a lot about drowsy driving, which is
Mm-hmm.
something that came up in my research a lot. So it has a lot of the same effects as drunk driving does,
Mm-hmm.
kind of the lack of alertness, the inability to like completely be there when you're driving, but it's not
Totally.
talked about. So the issue is that kids don't know, hey, if I didn't sleep all night and I'm running off of 0 hours of sleep, I can't just like get in my car. They don't know that. They just assume they've never heard that that would be an issue, and it kind of lessens all of your senses and you're unable to completely be like present on the road. So I think
Mm-hmm.
teaching older students that and just like, hey, if you have been up all night, maybe don't drive. Maybe just go
Yeah.
sleep for a little bit before you get behind the wheel, because it causes about 100,000 crashes annually, which I think the fact that it's not
Wow.
taught is just because, like, once again, we can't expect teens to know what they aren't taught. And they wouldn't
Yes.
know that, like, I wouldn't have known, like, if I had been up all night, I can't go drive to the grocery store to get whatever. I have to
Mm-hmm.
kind of sleep before I do that because it's unsafe for me and everyone else on the road if I were to go about doing that. But yeah.
So true. Have fallen asleep one time driving, and I was in high school. I was a senior in high school, and I had gone to visit a friend at college. So I had stayed up a lot of
Yeah.
the Saturday night and was driving home. It wasn't a really far drive, but I fell asleep and I woke up when I hit the graded side on the
Yeah.
highway,
Yeah. It wouldn't, yeah.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
and it luckily that was there, and it brought
Absolutely.
me to it was one of the scariest
Yes.
experiences of my life, because I remember thinking, if that road had not had that, I would have
Yeah.
driven right into a tree, and it was absolutely from being sleep
Yeah.
deprived.
Absolutely. So I think that, like, just like having that knowledge, like teens having that knowledge, and I mean everyone, but I think we as teens kind of sometimes lack the common sense or the knowledge to not drive when you're just absolutely drained and unable to like keep your head up.
Absolutely. Yeah, I envision it could be some sort of class similar to how maybe someone comes in to teach sex ed in middle
Yeah.
school. I know they don't call it sex ed anymore. I'm really dating myself. I'm sure that's not what they called it. But, some sort of 1 or 2 day educational moment, and potentially, checking back in with kids to see how they're doing. But I think that's such a great idea. And one thing we didn't really touch on, and I'm curious if it came up at all. I know it wasn't the focus of your project, but the sleep on academic performance. And I'm curious
Yes.
if it came up at all, if you stumbled upon things, or if you have felt it yourself where you do better
Yeah.
academically when you're sleeping well. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So that was a big part of my research that kind of when we're not sleeping well, we're not able to comprehend like complex tasks. And I've noticed I've always been not to not to brag, always been a pretty good student. I work really hard. And I have always kind of kept, A's, high B's. And I noticed that during COVID, my grades were like in the C, D range. And that had never, ever,
Interesting.
ever, ever happened to me. And I was too tired to care, which is also crazy because
Mm.
I'm such like I get really freaked out about my grades and stuff like that. So I absolutely personally have noticed a big, big connection between sleep and grades. Just in my life, I notice like if I'm not sleeping well, it's hard to kind of focus in on something when you're just
Hmm.
so unbelievably exhausted. Also, when you're sleep deprived, like if you're trying to study and you're, completely drained, like it's not doing anything. It's going in one ear out the
Yes.
other. And like it's just kind of you're unable to comprehend these things and then unable to, be successful in your completion of them.
Yes. This is something when I got obsessed with sleep, obviously as an adult and already a parent, the more I learned, I kept finding myself thinking, if I could turn back time, my college experience would look different
Yeah.
because I pulled so many study till 3 or 4 a.m.,
Mhm.
sleep for a couple hours before I go to an 8 a.m. test,
Yeah.
and I did not crush those tests. And I think I actually probably could have gone to bed at 10 and
Yes.
done as well, if not better, by just giving my brain a chance to like remember what I had
Yes.
learned. And I always think it's important for teens to understand that sleep prepares your brain to actually take in content in class, to actually retain what is taught to you.
Yes.
And then sleep is how your memory stores it.
Yeah.
And so these all nighters are so counterproductive. And I did so many
Yeah.
of them. And it just makes it harder than it needs to
It
be.
really does. I did read a lot about kind of like it gets to a point where you're much better off for your grade to sleep than to study. Like it gets to a point where you're so
Yes.
tired, like you're better off to sleep. You'll do better if you sleep rather than trying to kind of cram for a test.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I totally want to circle back with you and see when you're in college if you've been able to implement any of this for your own experience. So tell me what's next. You mentioned you're going to Florida. Do you think you'll continue to explore any topics related to health and mental wellness? And granted, I just got off a call with someone this morning who's in college, and I said, you don't need to know exactly what you're going to do with your life, but I'm curious kind of what you're thinking.
Yeah, so I'm honestly kind of just going to see where the wind takes me. Right now, I'm going in with a finance major. We'll see, if that feels right. I'm not entirely sure, but this was definitely something that was super interesting that I didn't think would be as kind of interesting for me as it was. I chose it with the idea of like, this is the um, probably only opportunity where I'll be able to learn about this if I'm majoring in finance and going into that world. They're so different. So I think like kind of is my last opportunity to learn about something that's so different from what I've like gonna be able to learn. And I also, like I said, have struggled with my sleep. So I was like, why not learn about it? Kind of have these ideas and these tips, and then kind of move on and go to college next year. But I found it a lot very, very interesting, and
Mm-hmm.
I think that like if I find myself, oh, I don't know what I want to do with my life, it would be something that I would definitely explore, kind of going into something in that field, being able to help people with sleep and all of that. And also just like learning that, yes, I'll have these tips that will be really helpful, but also if I struggle with something else that's completely unrelated, knowing that I could do the research and I could kind of
Yes.
have like the internet's there for me and kind of finding like a lot of these issues have solutions that are a
Uh-huh.
lot easier than you'd think. So I think having that knowledge that like I have the ability to kind of fix these issues for myself is super powerful, and I think super good to know for me for next year.
I love that. And I don't know if I told you this when we chatted before, but I was an investment banker for seven
Oh yeah.
years and I was on an origination and structuring team. And we did a lot of very unique deals. So
Mhm.
none of them were like the other. So they
Yeah.
were each had to be structured uniquely. And sometimes we'd get hung up on how to structure the deals. And the joke used to be when we would be in a sticking point and we're in there, for hours trying to, could we do it this way? Could we do it? Sometimes they would say, let's send Allison home to sleep on it, because I literally would come up with ideas in my
Yeah.
sleep, which then I didn't really think. Actually, I found it very stressful. I didn't like it. It made
Yeah.
me anxious about my sleep. But I look back at it now, and while I don't like that, I like to sleep soundly. I try not to come up with ideas in my sleep. It does kind of speak to the power of
Yeah,
sleep, because
absolutely.
we would be like thinking and feel so stuck. And then if I could just go home and sleep for a handful of hours, ideas would come to me on how we could
Yeah.
structure deals. So there's so much
Yeah.
power in it, no matter what you do.
Yes, absolutely. I think sleep is something that's so just like underrated, and kind of the importance of it is so forgotten about and kind of pushed aside just because it's something everyone does, and it doesn't matter if you're doing it for 5 hours or 10. But I think that like it needs to be something that's kind of prioritized for a lot of people, and it really could be life changing. Just simple things that you could change that would just completely improve the quality of your life.
Lizzie, this has been so great. I'm so glad you decided to do this project, and I really appreciate you agreeing to come on and chat with me. I think what you're doing, I truly think it will affect
I
somebody's
hope
life that
so.
you know. At some point, there will be a moment where, whether it's now or a few years down the road, where what you've done is going to help someone. So, thank you so much for doing this project. Thanks for joining me
Yeah, thank
today,
you.
and I hope we can stay connected.
Heck yeah. Thank you.
All right, bye for now.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to How Long Till Bedtime. To learn how we can work together to improve your child's sleep, please visit sleepandwellnesscoach.com.